Hello everyone and welcome back to Killer Shrew Fans Killer Toy Reviews, and today we will be taking a look at our second new for 2020 Safari Ltd dinosaur figure. It is of course the Deinonychus, or as I like to call it, the Dakota Raptor. The Dakota Raptor. Frickin' idiot. But anyway, that's all in the past and we live in the present, and here in the present we are taking a look at this Deinonychus, another beautiful fully feathered Dromaeosaur from Safari Ltd. This was one of the few from 2020 that I was actually really looking forward to right off the bat, and now that I finally have it, I still think it's a pretty dope model, and I cannot wait to give you a closer look, starting as always at the head. So taking a look at the head here, you can see that this Deinonychus has a very eagle-like aesthetic to it, right down to the yellow coloration of the snout, one of the few scaled areas on this model. Another interesting note is that this Deinonychus is sculpted in a closed mouth position, as are many of the 2020 offerings from Safari. Whereas I don't care a great deal for that decision, I think that this is one that definitely does it better than the others. Since there's some decent detailing going on here, it means we're not just left with a flat black painted on line, which is good to see. Still, it means we're missing out on seeing some lovely chompers, so I guess it's a wash. The eye is a vibrant orange coloration, don't see that too often, with the rounded bird-like pupil. I think an argument can be made that the eyes are seated too far back on the head, but it's not like egregious or anything. I think just a little scooch forward would have fixed it, but even so, what we got is not enough to kill the look for me. I think a bigger issue would be the sloppy paint apps on the left eye of mine. It doesn't even look like it covers the area that's meant to be the eye. That's probably just mine, but yeah, it bugs me. Something to look out for, I guess. You can see that the feathers come down to about halfway down the snout, with the hair-like filaments that transition into the larger, more complex feathers that start at the back of the skull. Moving down the length of the body, you can see all of the individually sculpted and nicely layered feathers. There's a fantastic level of detail on this model, but unfortunately I don't think it's all that apparent at a glance, and that's due in large part to the paint job, but I'm getting ahead of myself. I will say I love how the feathers grow in length and fan out at the tail. It has such a beautiful flow and naturalistic look to it, and just the overall level of floof this guy has is delightful. I love how poofy he looks. Taking a look at the feet of this Deinonychus, the only other scaled areas on this model, you can see that infamous sickle claw is held at the ready, while the other two toes are splayed out to provide stability. You can see that the claws are painted a jet black color, no weathering or texture to them, but I will say that I really appreciate how the killing claw maintains a sharp look to it, something that is usually lost on Safari figures for play safety reasons. Not much to talk about in terms of musculature in the legs, as it was all covered by the floof, but I will say that the transition from the feathers to the scales is a bit garish and two-toned, which is unfortunate. Now for the arms/wings of the Deinonychus. You can see that they are held partly folded with the long primaries peeking out under the secondary covering, and you can just barely see the claws showing through there as well. Those elements are lost given the uniform painting of the black and white colors, so if you took this thing at a glance, you might mistake the claws for just more wings. They're a bit more noticeable from the front, so that's good at least. But yes, the wings have a lovely layered sculpt to them, which is so important when sculpting something of this nature. I believe this is a functioning arm that can unfurl and bend and pose, rather than a flat piece of sculpted plastic. Safari does a very good job with stuff like this. As far as the pose goes with this is one of the more fluid that we got from Safari this year. You can see the Deinonychus is taking a half stride forward, bracing with its right foot while the head cranes slightly to the left and the tail is held in a low, swooping fashion. I like this pose a lot, especially when compared with the other Safari dinos from this year, and it's a real triumph that it does not need its tail in order to stand as originally presumed, so that is definitely worth noting. Unfortunately, there is an issue with its center of gravity. It leans so far to the right that really the right leg should have been forward to support that mass while the left leg braces. It is great that it doesn't need to tripod. In fact, it really can't, given how much heavier the front of the model is, but I have already experienced balancing issues with it given the stunted stance, and I would not be surprised if this is one of those situations where over time it just warps to a point where it cannot stand without support, similar to the 2017 feathered T-Rex. Issues with the pose aside, the paint job has some nice colors to it. It's clear they pulled reference from eagles to cover this butterball, with different shades of brown for the main body and white and black being used for the tips of the feathers and underbelly. The yellow is also a nice accent color for the scales. Unfortunately, it's missing a dry brush to really bring out all those sculptural details of the feathers, particularly on the midsection where the brown is so dark and all that detail is just lost. I've also noticed that the paint doesn't seem all that durable. There are already a few scuff marks on mine, and this thing, it only sits on the shelf. Granted, it's taken some tumbles given the balancing issues, but if the paint can't hold up to this thing falling over, it's definitely not going to make it through rough playtime, so that's something to bear in mind, I guess. As far as the size of this Deinonychus goes, it's got some length to it, coming in at 9 inches long, or 23 centimeters from tip of tail to tip of snout, and standing roughly 3¼ inches tall, or roughly 8 centimeters off the ground. So yeah, this feels like one of the bigger offerings this year. For size comparison, here it is next to the recently reviewed, also new for 2020, Safari Ltd. Dilophosaurus, and you can see the Deinonychus absolutely dwarfs that figure and trumps it in terms of detail as well. It's also cool to see these two side by side because Deinonychus was actually the inspiration for Michael Crichton's Velociraptors in Jurassic Park, so in a way, we got two icons of the JP franchise from Safari this year, which is cool to me. Next up for size comparison, here it is next to the 2017 Feathered Velociraptor, and you can see these two don't really stack up in terms of their size. But this also highlights my earlier point about using dry brushes to accent the details. You can see the feathers pop a lot better on the Velociraptor given the dry brush of darker colors over the orange feathers. There's a lot more visual interest to the 2017 offering, and I wish Safari had taken cues from that for this new Deinonychus. Next up, here's the Deinonychus with the original Bat-Tat Utahraptor, who seems to be under the impression that it's about to bag a rather large Thanksgiving turkey as opposed to a more scientifically accurate, properly feathered Dromaeosaur. And now for some proper Jurassic Park comparisons, here it is next to the 2005 Papo Velociraptor, which of course is based off the 1993 film. The dichotomy between these two is so pervasive when you set them side by side, and it really highlights how our understanding of dinosaurs has changed so drastically in the past quarter of a century alone. This is also a good comparison to do because the Papovelociraptor mold is one of the most commonly found in collections, so if you have that particular model in any color scheme, this should be a good indicator of the size you can expect from this Deinonychus. And finally, for size comparison, I did it again, I had to. Here it is next to the 3¾ inch Dr. Alan Grant, and yeah, this is fun. Even if Deinonychus would only technically come up to the waist or so in life, this is still the species that inspired the dinosaurs of the franchise, and through that lens, these two size up nearly perfectly with each other, and it is a lot of fun to see what a more scientifically accurate Jurassic Park would look like. I'm not saying that's what we need for the franchise, but it's just fun to see how things could be if the story was written in 2020 as opposed to 1990. So there you have it, guys. That will do it for our look at the new for 2020 Safari Ltd. Deinonychus. I feel like I was pretty critical of this thing throughout this review, but really the only truly glaring issues are the balance concerns and the not so robust paint job. Even with that in mind, the overall appeal of this model cannot be ignored, and I wouldn't be surprised if it turned out to be one of my favorites from the lineup this year. That being said, I think it's safe to say that I dig this Deinonychus, and I'm sure you will too. Always great to add another properly feathered Dromaeosaur to the pack, and I hope if Safari Ltd. continues to churn these dinos out, that they will start putting them in proper scale with one another. That would be awesome, but I won't hold my breath for that. As always, I want to know what you guys think of this model. Do you own it yet? Are you planning to pick it up? What model should I get next from this year's lineup? Leave all your thoughts down below, and as always, thank you so much for tuning in. Remember, washing with soap is always more effective than just using Germ-X, and I hope to see you again in the next review. Bye-bye.